This is Life Worlds, the place where we explore life through other eyes and minds. Let's flip the script and discover how to orient your world around nature. I'm Alexa Firminish. Come join me as we get down and forage for fungi, stalk coyotes, draft laws for rivers, hum with beehives, sing bird language, and help beavers to dam again. Let these stories spark your reconnection to nature's multiverse. Learn how to bring ecosystems back to life, become an agent for other intelligences, and begin to see how you too are the sum of all life worlds. Hi everyone. For today's episode on the ecology of health, I am going to start us off with an anecdote, which I think is actually quite a good segue into the episode. Last year, I was giving a talk at a conference in Munich about Earth systems, science, and poetry. And on one of the slides that I was presenting, I had this stunning graphic of the migratory flows of wildlife as visualized from space. And that visualization was based on different tag and sensor data that was generated by the wildlife movements. And it's a beautiful graphic. I'll link it in the show notes. And in front of quite a senior audience, including the president of the European Commission, I said something along the lines of, well, as you can see, these migratory animals move like blood cells, traveling across the organs of our body. Oh, sorry, I mean the Earth body. And, it was a subtle slip, one that likely not many people caught. But it definitely betrayed my much more deeply held beliefs that the earth is our body, and there is only the mildest of distinctions between where our bodies end and the world begins. And we're going to be exploring that topic today. Our guest is Dr. Mackenzie Hall, who is a doctor of traditional and classical Chinese medicine, and also specialized in functional medicine, along with how the mind and unresolved emotions influence the body. Now, I met Mackenzie in a doctor's chair in San Francisco, and we struck up a conversation, especially about the intricacies and elegance of the traditional Chinese medicine system, which I'll refer to as TCM for short. And this was actually the first time I became aware of how closely some of the concepts of TCM mirrored my own work with ecological systems. And needless to say, I was very fascinated by the parallels. And Mackenzie and I ended up spending many late nights poring over TCM books and looking at maps of the human body and comparing them to the Earth body. And my mind was whirring about the comparisons that people could draw between them. And so this notion of our human bodies being such reflections of nature forever stuck with me. And also I've since experienced firsthand the wisdom and potency of the TCM system for some of my own healing, including bouts of insomnia and various illnesses I've had. And, to bring you into some of these late night conversations, like I kept wondering, for example, how could one imagine the planet's vital organs as reflected in human anatomy? Like, is the Amazon rainforest a hydroheart? Would the ice caps maybe be our kidneys because they're such storehouses of aquatic memory? And how does the earth balance and detoxify itself? And how could this mirror how we work with our own bodies and vice versa, right? What can we learn from our own bodies about the earth? And, other questions popped up, like how does our body system hold, manage, and deal with pathology? And how could that understanding help those who are working with the earth as protectors and regenerators? And it struck me quite strongly that the stagnation in our bodies mirrors the rivers all over the earth that cannot flow, right? Think about the dams that block the migrations of fish, the wire fences that prevent the earth from breathing. So how do we listen for the earth's pulse? And is there a possibility for humans to be white blood cells of the world, playing our part in its healing? I tried to put some of those parallels into words, actually, in an article I wrote once called Our Planet's Blood, which I've also linked. And near the end of the article, I wrote this. The innumerable relationships that hold our planet in delicate balance are vanishing, dismembered piece by piece into parcels of scattered organs. Barbed wire fences encircle our intestines, 8-lane highways slice across our throat, and the remnants of dams and weirs choke our lungs. Pipelines leach into procreative ovaries, and power cables numb the brain. Tightening ligatures of hedgerows and monoculture plantations are branded across our skin. Quite powerful language, but I think the parallels between our body and the Earth's body really help to drive it home. And so that's what we're going to delve into today. Human health, as seen through and within the lens of planetary health. I think it's a necessary and beautiful perspective. Seeing the Earth as a body itself, explored through the tremendous intimacy of our own bodies, can help us to connect on a much more visceral level and become more intimate with nature. Think about things like toxicity, pollution, healing. Nothing strikes as close to home as how these dynamics play out under our skin. And as many, many medical systems point out, all disease in the body is, on some level, a form of unexamined psyche, unexamined emotions. Which leads us actually to the last moments of this discussion, where we discuss how the human collective psyche includes these kinds of unexamined tendencies, repressions, emotions, dysbiosis, and how perhaps what we call the climate crisis are many of these things externalized in physical form. I'm very curious what this conversation will spark in you and what ideas of healing flows will come to you and what parallels and creative ideas you might have about the earth and body systems. Just to close this part of the conversation where, I think if we are to ensure the earth's aliveness, its regeneration, we have to feel it as our own body. Earth's natural impulses and flows are our own, internal to us. We must feel its stagnation and constrictions within our organs. And I think that we can really embrace and embody its circulatory wildness instead of fearing it. And only then will we release the natural rhythms and rights of light back into our landscapes. So that's it for me for now. Over to our conversation with Dr. Mackenzie Hall. Mackenzie, hello, good morning. Welcome to Life Worlds.
Hi, thank you. It's good to be here.
It's such a joy to have you here. See your smiling face on the screen. We have been talking about the intersection of human health, planetary health for years now. And I had the joy of, even living with you for a moment in time and having these discussions over mornings and late nights and as we were cooking our food. And I'm really excited to bring this to our listeners on Life Worlds, because I think the way that we relate to our bodies is just a mirror of the earth body. And I think where I want to kick us off is, we often have spoken about this notion of the body being as nature. And I remember once you've said to me, it's the same natural forces that shape the world around us, the seasons, the elements, the harmony of opposites that govern our own body's health, and then the healing of the earth, as well as our own bodies and planet. And so you're trained in many methodologies. One of them is traditional Chinese medicine, but there's many others, and you can speak to that. And in that school of thought, or that lineage, let's say, the body is a reflection of nature. And so I want to ask you, just to kick us off by sort of unpacking that notion that the body is a reflection of nature, that it's like a microcosm of the universe, if you will. Like, where does our body end and the earth begin? Is that even the right question?
Yeah, no, that's great. I think we can begin with the feeling sense, because that's such a wonderful way to kick us off, is where do we end and where does the earth begin? Where does the universe begin? And if you were to lay with your back against the earth, I think that you would see and feel and find that you can actually tell energetically where you end and where the earth begins. And in that sense, we are the universe, we are the macrocosm. And traditional and classical Chinese medicine do such a beautiful job of getting this across, that we're not in relationship to nature. We are it. And in an ultimate sense and in a relative sense, being that we are a microcosm of all the movements that happen in nature, from the ebb and flow of the ocean to the movement of stars and planets. We are these biological systems of movement.
That's so poetically and beautifully said. Even just that image of lying our backs down. How I noticed even in like when we were living together, there was this book you had me read, right? The Web That Has No Weaver, and we had so many conversations about it. I'll link it in the show notes. And what I thought was so interesting was even just in the language used in some of the Eastern methods of health, there were mirrors with like the earth systems, things like veins or rivers. Or for people that have never come across this, I actually think it's quite fascinating. Could you like share some of those or kind of break them down for us? It's just, I think it's so poetic and potent at the same time.
Yeah, the book, the Web That Has No Weaver. I think I read it 3 times before I realized I had to go to Chinese medical school. It does such a beautiful job of illuminating how the body is this interconnected elemental system. And Chinese medicine, so there's traditional Chinese medicine and classical Chinese medicine. Most people in the world are trained traditionally. I also practice classical Chinese medicine, which means that it's the medicine, the pre-communist medicine, before the medicine got filtered through that era. And it does such a beautiful job of illuminating how we move as nature, how we are. The human body is literally a geographical reflection of the same phenomena that occurs in the geography of nature. So I think part of what you're referring to is I think I've explained before, that the way that the human body takes in its external environment is it literally starts with the extremities at the fingertips and the toes. And if you were to translate the names of these points that start at the extremities, they literally translate to phenomena in nature, and specifically that of a water system. So starting with the well at the very fingertips, into the river and the stream and the spring, as a way of understanding literally how the body takes in its environment. You also mentioned veins, the rivers and veins. I think you said that. And just that we can compare every system in the body to that of nature again. So if you think about the venous system, you could compare that to Earth's water system. And, how much reserve, how much stock, how much essence is there to help support the flow and the integrity of that system.
And there was something that always kind of confused me a little bit. Then there's like an Ayurveda system. You can be like different, you can be like go towards hot or windy. I don't quite know that system very well. But in the Chinese system, you have things like windy or damp or wet or what are those? Like, are you like one of
Yeah.
those all the time, or it's like, oh, today's a windy day, or how does that translate?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, the Ayurvedic system is beautiful too. It breaks down energy bodies into doshas, into the 3 doshas. And in Chinese medicine, it's a little bit different. It uses a basic taxonomy of certain environmental qualities, like hot, cold, like wind, heat, damp. So, for example, a cold virus is considered wind, literally wind invading the channel system. Viruses are considered hot or heat pathology. Bacteria or mold are considered damp. Like if you were to go to a really boggy area in nature, that's where you would find those kinds of microorganisms. Same as if you eat foods of that quality. If you're going to eat something like banana or avocado, that would be classified more as damp.
And so when you're treating someone, and I want to go back to something you said before, this this classical system that was sort of pre what is called, quote unquote, the Cultural Revolution, I guess. How, where does it even come from? Like, how did it develop, right? And all of these, even these notions of, damp or windy or the vasculature, like the veins, was it just thousands of practitioners around that part of the world that sort of brought it together? Or what's the, I guess I'm curious about the genesis of it, because it is such a rigorous science in a way.
Mm.
So what did it emerge from? And was it people that were observing nature and the human body and working on both? Or I'm curious about that.
Yeah, there's different theories. Unfortunately, the ancient texts, the two main texts in classical Chinese medicine, nobody agrees. So we only have ideas. But of course, everything begins with energy, right? That's true in science. That's true of this medicine. So, the original theory is around the channels, the movement of energy, and how that energy moves in a body. And so, there's one theory that the medicine began actually with shiatsu practitioners, like blind practitioners who are literally sensing the body's energetic pathways. That taxonomy I was explaining of, wind, cold, damp, these are ways of describing environmental conditions in and outside of the body. But in terms of understanding the movement of energy through a channel system, this is the most foundational aspect to the medicine. What classical Chinese medicine is so brilliant at is looking at chronic latent conditions, which is really pertinent to this time and what humans are facing now. So instead of just treating a knee pain or a pulled elbow, we're really interested in understanding how the body's energetic system holds, manages, and deals with pathology, how it moves that energy out of the body, and what impedes it from doing so.
Yeah, in the introduction to the show, I spoke a little bit about, I think what fascinated me about this, and it is the like holistic systems perspective of like, we don't treat one organ if everything else is sick. And often one thing is wrong, but it's downstream or upstream from something else. And so I'm curious in the tradition or even in the modern day, because we're about to have a conversation on this, but is it common or have there been conversations on how, I'll say Chinese medicine, but I know that you're versed in several different schools, but how Chinese medicine can be used to look at the earth pathologies that are currently underway? And let's go even before the sort of runaway climate crisis. Is there anything known about like traditionally practitioners of that medicine working with the earth, or was it really they were working with human bodies? Or is there anything in their text that even talks about how it translates to like nature?
Yeah, what a wonderful question. Yeah, I think that practitioners have always been working with them inseparably, like the body as the earth as the body, inseparable. And there's a very important term in classical Chinese medicine, which is mediumship, which really just refers to reserve, to stock on earth as in the body, like water. Is there enough water? Is there enough blood in the body to move pathology out of it? Is there enough water on earth to be able to stabilize temperature and move toxicity through its meridian system? Same.
So do you think it showed up culturally in ancient China in the ways that they were managing their landscapes? Like, did they have, for example, like a good hydrology system? Is that known? I'm
Oh,
curious.
that's such a wonderful question. I don't know, but I do know that the Tao and the I Ching and the hexagrams, meaning the energy patterns, this was created by, so they say, farmers observing the skies and crops and how nature is cycling. And by making those observations, same as the scientific method, it all starts with observation, then you might deduce what kinds of patterns happen in a human body or in other ecosystems. So I wouldn't be surprised, what you're saying. People who were directly translating healing methods for the landscape as per the body and vice versa.
I think either I need to do a search on whether a book on that exists, or someone should definitely be writing a book. But knowing humanity, someone's written a book about that.
Yeah.
Before going further, because I think where I want us to go is to talk about, like, when I think of the environmental work I do, I'm often thinking about, like, for example, like the Amazon. Is it like the beating heart of the planet, or is it the kidneys because it's the water system? And that leads us to think about like acupuncture points and systems. But taking a step back, for people that haven't even come across TCM or classical medicine, can you bring us into like a hypothetical case study? Someone comes to you and they're like, hey, I'm experiencing this chronic condition. And how would a practitioner like yourself work with that person to make a diagnosis? And, I know, for example, there's herbs involved at some point. There's like pulses that are taken. There's acupuncture. But can you bring us into the process that you go into to sense their body in order to support them with a treatment? And again, in terms of life worlds, I think so much of what we talk about in the podcast is like, what are the capacities that we need to sense a system well in order to operate within it? How do we inhabit its life world? And so when it comes to, let's say, the life world of like a human body or a patient you're working with, what does that look like? I'm sure it's not all the same, but maybe just bring us into a hypothetical that could like illustrate that or illuminate it for us.
Yeah, it's about listening. And it's about listening to the whole person, the whole system, not a sick person or a fragmented part of a person, but really the whole person, and appreciating the genius and the intelligence of that body, of that system, and that it's doing everything it can to protect itself, that it's not actually doing anything wrong. And so, as a practitioner, my job is just to listen to exactly what the body is saying, and offer it a way to help resolve what it's trying to work with nature, to work with what it's trying to do. There are always two questions when a person comes in. It really comes down to two things. And I think this is the same with the planet. Is there enough? Is there enough stock, reserve, essence? And can it move? Is it flowing? These are the two questions to ask the body when you take a pulse, when you look at biodata. You're seeing what's the body working with, and is it stagnating or not? Stagnation leads to illness. That's the basic premise of TCM. And those are the two questions, and it's understanding at which level of that beautiful and complex way that the body is managing its toxicity or emotional buildup or whatever it is, how the body is dealing with that, to see if you can support it to resolve it more quickly.
So I'll come to you, as I actually have. Where does my stock exist? Is there like a few places, or is it like distributed? How do you check me?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Well, what I would feel in your pulse is the width of the pulse. How much blood is there? I would feel into the kidneys is their essence. It'd be like looking at the ice caps or the glaciers. Like, is there enough? Is there enough feeding the rest of the system? And then I would look at whether that stock and reserve can actually move and distribute to where it needs to. The body does a very sophisticated job of keeping pathology from the internal organs, namely the heart. The body will do everything it can to keep the heart beating, even if it means giving someone a less worse disease than a fatal one, like a heart attack. So the body really works like a system of chutes and ladders. It will play like hot potato with pathology. So if there's not enough stock or reserve, like the global climate crisis, all of a sudden you'll see all these symptoms happening in different aspects of ecology, like pathology is being handed off to different systems. So, for example, someone comes in and they have rheumatoid arthritis, but that's not the root of what's happening, right? This is just a symptom of the way that the body is trying to handle pathology. And it's something that happens really frequently. And one of the first places that the body will try to store what's harmful to it is in the densest places, like bones and muscles and teeth and glands. It's a beautiful and intricate way for understanding how ecology deals with disease, deals with disharmony, in order to preserve the larger system.
That's so interesting. What are some of the most common pathologies that you've been seeing recently? And maybe that, other practitioners, because I know you're networked with a lot of different people that are talking about this stuff. What's like on the rise, and what do you think that has to say about our world?
Yeah, every person really brings up the state of the world. That's what I'm seeing. Speaking clinically, I think the two most challenging and just rampant conditions that are feeding into every other are gut and sleep. There are so many ways that these tight junctions that maintain the integrity of the gut lining are just so much burden on the gut, so much disruption there, so much loss of integrity because of agrochemicals and what we're breathing and eating and how we're relating to the environment. And it makes it very challenging for the system to stay healthy when what you're taking into it is breaking down the very integrity that defines it. That's one. The other is with sleep and just the massive epidemic of dysregulated nervous systems. I mean, you think of the light pollution, again, chemicals. The sympathetic nervous system stays triggered, and we stay in this state of high alert, and therefore can't resolve emotions or toxins the way that we need to, which really is the basis of health. Like, how are we resolving experiences moment to moment? And between these two things, it makes it hard to heal. So I think the challenge right now is if we don't have a baseline of what we actually need to heal, how do we support a body when it's that stripped naked of its most important necessities? And we see this in the environment as well.
That's so interesting. Yeah, what I'm hearing you say, both in the gut and the sleep, the sort of nervous system overload, it's like toxicity and pollution in a way, and out of the 9 planetary boundaries, like quite a few relate to that, right? Sort of novel entities like PFAs and water systems, or you mentioned agrochemicals, and I guess in a way, the gut, the parallel is, I mean, you might correct me, you should correct me, but we have our microbiome in our bodies, in our guts. And we've seen that creates so many of our hormones, our serotonin. It regulates everything. Like if my stomach's not well, like I track my stats. All of my stats are just like all over the place. And in a way, I'll pin it for later, but maybe that's our soils, like the guts of our bodies, or like the microbiome of the earth. And obviously we are, the soil of the earth is where everything comes from, but especially our food. So if it doesn't have nutrients, I think like apples or vegetables today are like 10 times more nutrient deficient than in the past. I mean, there's tons of things on this. So we're not getting the nutrients we need, and the nutrients we are getting are polluted. So there's toxicity there. And then what I'm hearing with sleep and nervous system, I was speaking with a woman who works with whales yesterday, and she was saying, and she's going to come on the podcast, and she was saying that there's one thing we could do for sort of cetaceans or like underwater large mammalian life. It's like cut out the noise, because they're singing their songs are like maintaining some integrity in the ocean that we're just beginning to understand. And I mean, it's like when when you're snorkeling and the water and a boat passes, it sounds like it's right next to you and it's like so far away. And imagine how sensitive these beings are. And when you speak to researchers working in like bioacoustics, noise pollution could really be its own planetary boundary, let's say, because it disrupts everything. And not to mention light pollution. And when you're in a city, sonic, I mean, it's so intense. And so what I imagine when you're saying sort of this nervous system deregulation, it's like this like static that doesn't allow the communication between the different parts of that system to actually speak to each other because we're injecting so much noise, whether it's like biochemical noise that just like prevents the flow or sonic noise. So for the sort of nervous system piece, it's clear in our bodies what our nervous system is. I see it as different to the flows of water. Is there a parallel in the natural world that you would, or in nature, nature is a funny word to use in this kind of conversation, but what would the nervous system sleep parallel be in quote unquote nature? Like what would the nervous system be of the earth? Is that still water or would it be something different?
Mm. What a wonderful question. I love
Again, we're
this exploration.
speculating. I think, there's
Yeah,
no
of
there's no
course, it's
answers in stone,
all,
but it's an interesting
yeah.
speculation to play with.
Yeah, and we don't know. We are
Yeah.
just approximating the best we know how, and it's so much fun to
Mm-hmm.
explore. But yeah, I think the Earth's ecosystem is its resonance, is its frequency, is that 8 hertz. It's, and for a human to lay on the ground, to stay bare feet on the ground is the best way to come in relationship with that resonance of the Earth, of the Earth's heartbeat. And I think it's fundamental. And you named the two things. It's that frequency, that resonance, and it's the actual soil itself, because that does mimic our internal soil system. It's one and the same. It's the same biochemical communication happening inside as what's happening in plant and fungal networks in the ground.
Oh, that's interesting that the nervous system could also be some of the literal wiring of the ecosystems. Yeah, like the mycorrhizals. What do you mean by frequency? Because it's a word I think we both spent a lot of time in like new age circles, and I want to break down that word a little bit further. Like, does the earth have a measurable frequency? Is there anything scientific to that? Because we obviously have a feeling like when I'm by the ocean, I feel different to when I'm in the mountain, and there's a energetic tone to that place. But yeah, how should one understand frequency in this kind of conversation?
Yeah, and scientifically, the Earth does have a frequency, and everything is emitting a frequency. And if we can get slow enough and still enough and find that signal in the noise, like you were speaking to, I think that becomes everyone's opportunity as a felt sense in a way that we can re regulate. It's challenging because collectively there are less ways to regulate because of the amount of pollution, light, noise,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so much becoming up to each person to find that signal, that rest, that stillness, that wavelength in ourselves that speaks to a state of healing.
Actually, what I think is quite interesting there, you just made me think of it. I sometimes do like yoga nidra when I need to rest in the middle of the day. I'm trying to do it more. But so the brain has different waves, right? You've got like beta, gamma, delta waves, and meditation brings you into one state. And if you know anything about this, I'd be curious for you to share. But those different wavelengths of the brain generate different states that kind of kickstart our body to create certain hormones or compounds. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the slower we can get, and the more you can drop into those states, like a gamma state through meditation, the more that the body naturally heals itself. nature and the body are always in a state of self-repair and healing. And a lot of the time it's about getting the mind out of the way. It reminds me of, just thinking about taking any person's pulse. What you're really feeling is how the mind is interrupting these states, these very natural states that the body in nature wishes to reside. It's seeing how the activity of the mind is literally impeding the function of the organs.
That's so interesting. So, okay. So how would we put the earth into like a gamma state so that it could repair itself more? What would that look like? I mean, would we just like play, I don't know, crystal balls to the forest? Like that doesn't quite feel right. Is it, or as you say, is it like silencing the mind enough, which in a way we have like a technology mind today. Like I even notice my concentration is not what it was because I'm jumping between things in the day on my technology. So would like putting the earth in a gamma sort of be like quieting the more rapid things which often do come from our technologies? Or I guess I'm just curious, like are ecosystems naturally in gamma because they're just nature doing its thing?
Yeah, I think so. Exactly. I think nature is doing its thing, and the humans and the mind has interrupted nature doing its thing. So I think that instead of playing crystal balls in the forest, if we start to learn ways to soothe ourselves and to embody so that the conduct is aligned in the first place, that's really where that mirror comes in, person to planet, is we've gotten to a point now where we actually have to look back at the person who disconnected in the first place. And if the person can embody in a deeper way, then the conduct is going to be reflective of that and just naturally will be more in harmony with what the planet does to
Mm-hmm.
itself, unto itself
Mm-hmm.
anyway.
Yeah, when you become more sensitized, you realize how out of whack we are. It's like there's no point being well regulated to like a very dysregulated system. Talk to me a little bit about biomarkers, because I think one of the cool things about your approach is you also look at this Western, right? Let's look at your blood. Let's look at all of these different markers. I don't know if that's traditionally part of TCM but what do you think is interesting about looking at, and there's a lot of companies today raising, billions of dollars to analyze your biomarkers and do like very specific health. So what are biomarkers? How do you read them and integrate them into this like holistic way of reading the body?
Yeah. Yeah, I do something a little bit different as a Chinese medicine practitioner because I'm really interested in functional medicine and um, alternative medicine therapies as well, using biodata to help inform treatment. And I think what people are most needing right now is integration and coherence across these medical disciplines. They're all having different conversations. And I think it can be really helpful to the human to be able to actually synthesize what the markers are saying, what their energy is saying, what their emotional experience is saying. Biomarkers are just patterns, right? And it's contentious, in alternative medicine and functional medicine. There's a lot of differing views around their validity, but you're really just getting a snapshot. And often just that snapshot can give you insight into the patterns of the body in that moment, of the cells, how the cells are speaking and communicating, if they're starving of something, if they're needing something. And engaging in that kind of conversation in the body can be really illuminating.
So if we go back to our hypothetical patient, I've come in, you've felt like I'm low on certain flows. What are examples of biomarkers that you like check? Like what would you look at, and then how do you reconcile them with the holistic approach?
Yeah. Um, you know, Two of the main things that people are wanting to look at tend to be the gut first and foremost, um, at least in my clinical experience, and nutrients and antioxidants, and then the accumulation of harmful stuff like heavy metals and mold, and is there Lyme, and are there bacterial microorganisms that aren't supposed to be there, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the most one of the most common patterns that I see. I mean, I don't think I've seen normal glutathione levels in any human that I've done blood work for. We're just massively depleted of antioxidants. The question with healing and with the planet, it's the same question. Is the rate of injury faster than the rate of repair? We're trying to create momentum of repair that meets or exceeds the rate of injury. And that's true of the body and the environment. And when you see all these antioxidants being depleted in the body, of course, the body's under so much stress trying to clear these, what is it, 3,000 toxins that they're currently finding in the human body.
So do you think that the earth, like our body, could reach a point where it's unable to manage or regulate that sort of dysbiosis or inflammation or toxicity?
Yeah, that's a great question. The planet, just like the body, has its threshold. Every person is different. Every person has a different threshold, and we're watching we're watching in the planet this threshold being met, right? With I'm on a Greek island right now, and we've had all these earthquakes, and from what's coming out of the ground, and fires, and deforestation, and all these massive irregularities occurring on Earth. It reminds me of the same way that the human body off gases and is trying to release when it's reached its burden of accumulation. Again, that whole idea and the basic premise of classical Chinese medicine of latency, like how much can the earth keep latent? How much can it accumulate before the dam breaks, so to speak?
Gosh, that makes me think. I know I've shared this article with you in the past, but when I was working in the Pacific Northwest and thinking about ecological restoration, it's not my original thought, but that the migratory species of the earth are like the nutrients or the blood cells in a way. And, they're traveling between continents, whether it's turtles or whales or birds, or in this case, I was thinking about salmon. And they literally connect these seemingly disparate ecosystems together. And in the case of the salmon, they go into the deep ocean and they stock up on so many different nutrients, right? And so many different isotopes. And then they bring that up mountain to the ancient forest where they spawn. So they create the babies for the next generation and they die and they're picked up into the forest by the bears and the wolves and the hawks. And, there was a study in BC a few years ago that showed that I think it's 70% of the nitrogen isotopes in the forest of a certain kind are coming from the salmon. And so the salmon are literally the lifeblood or the nutrients of the ocean. And so when you see from these data repositories of tags on migratory species flying across, I'll put those in the show notes for people that want to see it. The species really just look like these like cells transferring information and nutrients. And so, one, if we have less of them, like the salmon migrations are dying or they're dammed, and so they can't swim upstream. We have less and less salmon coming back from the deep ocean. We don't know why. So if their movement is prohibited, or if there's less of them, you start to lose what you described, right? Which is this idea of stocks or flows, and then I guess the body's natural ability to have enough energy to actually heal itself. And so I think for me, a question that comes from that is what would be the immunity system or the white blood cells of the earth? Does the planet have an immunity system, in the same way that humans do when we're trying to get things back in order, or there's viruses or disease?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And I so appreciated this article. It brought to light this incredible, how nuanced, this amazing orchestration of planetary movement is, this beautiful symphony of movement. And yeah, immunity and white blood cells. stock and flow. You think about when this movement stops functioning, when there is stagnation, and all of a sudden there's accumulation and pathology and toxicity where there isn't supposed to be, and this starts amassing. I mean, this is another name for cancer. I think that what keeps systems healthy ecologically and in the body, same, is the biodiversity. Was exactly what you were speaking to. The coordinated biodiversity is so, white blood cells, it's like the microorganisms, that serve as this massive, biodiversity shield against what's not supposed to be there, what's not supposed to be accumulating.
So for someone like me that's working with ecosystem protection and regeneration, what could I learn from TCM and Eastern medicine perspectives on how to work with the earth as in that role as a protector, as a regenerator? I mean, the classic way I think you hear often is with acupuncture points, right? It's like, oh, like this place can be an acupuncture point. This place can be an island of coherence, like, and obviously for anyone who's on acupuncture, like it's astounding. Like you put this little needle in and there's like a zing, like an electric shock. And then it like activates this whole channel by like drawing energy to it. So does the earth body have these acupuncture points, like places where there's more concentration of something that should be unleashed? Is that relevant when we talk about the earth? And what would they be? And like, should they be connected? Or how does one think about that?
Yeah, what a wonderful question. Yeah, what I love about what you do, Alexa, is standing up as one of these people, is that you're interested in the whole channel activation, because it isn't just about single points. It's never just the single person. The point is just the access. It's the whole channel igniting that makes a shift. You would never treat a person based on points. You would treat a person based on the channel, just like the earth system. And now that we have come to a moment where there is need for support with repair, what a beautiful way of thinking about it, that it is activating a channel of people everywhere, igniting the healing that needs to happen across the globe, just as would happen with the healing treatment for the body.
You just gave me a thought that I think is actually a positive one. The humans could also be the white blood cells. I mean, like the people who are acting on behalf of healing the earth, and there's so many millions of people out there, whether it's, planting pollinator pathways in cities or restoring large watersheds, but the human as a keystone species, but also as an agent of healing, being the white blood cell, and going to these places and sort of, I think it's a beautiful invitation for what we can be versus being the other thing that you described, which is the cancer, where we build up these big toxic cities and these kinds of clumps of inorganic matter. I don't know if you saw this statistic. I think I have it on my desktop, but yeah, here it is. That the amount of man-made structures now outweigh the mass of the living world. So everything from our technomass, according to this research, it's at 1,300 gigatons. So metals, asphalt, concrete, aggregates, plastics, bricks. And then biomass is 1,100 gigatons, and that's plants, bacteria, archaea, protists, fungi, animals, viruses. Obviously, there's our estimations because we're just learning all the time about like biomass and, is there more, is there less? But even the thought that our man-made structures could outweigh the living world is quite astounding, in terms of humans being this shape on the planet. A lot of those structures are cancerous to the earth, right? They do impede the flows. Like even if you think in cities, concrete doesn't allow the water to flow in the way it would. Like we just spoke on the last episode about the LA watershed and the fires. I mean, the river can't rove and move as she would want to, so she can't spread her nutrients. I always remember living in Mexico City, like when all of these jacaranda trees would bloom, and then all the trees, even in the autumn, like trees shed their leaves, and those leaves want to return to the soil and feed the cycle. but they can't because we've put the concrete there, and literally the leaves are just like rotting on concrete. I mean, for me, it's one of the saddest things I've ever seen. I just like want to scoop them up and put them in a compost pile somewhere, but then I'm like that mad, that mad lady. So humans as white blood cells, I think, is an interesting invitation. And so when we're thinking about cleansing or detoxifying our own bodies and the earth body, what's like the first order of effect? So maybe people are listening to this and they're like, oh gosh, my body probably is toxic. That's a lot to hold. What's my first line of action there? And then generally humans go on like a cleanse or a detox, right? And can you speak a little bit about what like a cleanse is in a human body medical system, and what can kind of emerge from that? And then like a nature cleanse, what would a nature cleanse be, or nature detox for like an ecosystem?
Yeah. Yeah, I love this. I love this about the human. The aspiration of modern human is to be the white blood cell. It's great. Yeah, detoxification. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's almost like to be a human alive right now. You kind of have to be aware of how to detoxify and live a life that just is non-toxic as much as you can. Right? We do our best. I think one thing that even alternative medicine and that we're getting wrong is this idea of stripping everything away. Just in the this is what Chinese medicine is so beautiful at illuminating, is the importance of that essence, that mediumship, that stock. If there isn't enough, then how do you ride toxins out of a body? So I would just say to all those, in trying to figure out ways to detoxify, to stay in congruence with nature and with nature's cycles, and the natural capacity to detoxify on behalf of nature, is just to make sure that there's enough. To strip everything away if there isn't enough stock can be really detrimental to the ecosystem. And that being said, I think it's so important to have these periods of time of silence where you really are giving the body a chance to go into auto healing, which it does when it's, in a good detoxification or a fast, or whatever is good for that person's body.
Are there any like tried and tested rules that every person like could do to detoxify, or is it really, really specific and it's almost dangerous to tell people like to have like, oh, this is, yeah, like to be more generalist in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it is dangerous to tell people that there's one way. I think it's dangerous to bucket people. I think that as similar as we are all very unique ecosystems, each and every one of us. It's amazing. Every body and every person is at a different stage of development. And it's really important to honor where that person is emotionally and where that person's body is at. And from there, then you can understand a nuanced and supportive way to detoxify well and thoroughly and properly. I think it's a disservice to think that every body can just do or achieve the same thing in the same way.
What I have found interesting is in moments when I'm trying to sort of quote unquote detoxify, and I guess the way that I often do it is, I mean, I'm always conscious of where I try and get my food. It's not always possible, price wise or availability wise, but that's just the first source, is like, is my food toxic in the first place? And then, cutting out things that I know are like kind of naughty, and then drinking like a lot of water to flush things out. Like I do all that. And what I notice happens is like a lot of emotions can come up. And I have researched enough to understand that that's actually common, and that when a human detoxifies, that our toxins like actually hold emotion. And that's not kook science. It's actually like incredibly well known across many modalities. Can you speak to like the emotional part of the detoxifying? Because then in the human sense, because then I want to link it to the ecology, and what I'm sort of seeing happen in that realm.
Yeah. Yeah, just as a baseline, they say the ancient texts of Chinese medicine say that aside from an external pathogen, meaning like a virus or something that comes from the environment, the only cause of disease is unresolved emotion, which is really powerful to think about. So detox aside, there's just this basic premise that what is unresolved ends up creating disease. And when you detoxify, just as you're saying, there's so much bound into toxins. I mean, that's what they do. They clump together and they hang out in the system where they're not supposed to be, and they're not moving. Um, Wherever there's accumulation, there's some experience, whether it has emotional implications. Um, that what you're speaking to is so true and so relevant. And in my own clinical experience, this is prevalent and happens for many. That when you start kind of excavating and getting into the nooks and crannies of the body's holding patterns, so much comes up and out that wants to be felt and resolved. And I'd love to hear, yeah, what you have to say from a
Mm.
more ecological standpoint of how nature detoxifies naturally on its own, as its own just process of regeneration.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of brings me to the feelings of like grief and denial and fear that so many people are experiencing today because we're looking out at the world and it's clear that our economic systems are creating some of the largest injustices that have ever existed. Slavery is still so common in so many ways. Colonialism is still so alive. Politically, things are chaotic and unpredictable and seem to be steamrollering in ways we don't understand. We have, runaway AI, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then we obviously have the collapse of ecosystems, and many people are deeply in love and enmeshed in those ecosystems, and you see the things you love dying. So I think we collectively, and we've spoken about this in the podcast and we'll continue to in some of the next episodes, there's so much unprocessed grief and fear and pain and loss, which can also lead to a numbing for obvious reasons. Because if you're not held in a way that, if there's no safety to process that, it's normal you don't want to go into it. Like, I really understand if people actually can't access that in themselves because it's so big, if you really let yourself feel. And so there's a contraction in that, right? There's like a physical like contraction because there's a tension that we're not facing that's present. And I think that when we look at what's happening, quote unquote, externally in the world, as you said, all disease is a form of unexamined psyche of some form. And the external climate crisis is a reflection of what's wrong internally to us, the ways that we are viewing other life, the way we're viewing other humans. There's like a huge psychological, spiritual misalignment, right? Currently prevalent everywhere. And there's 100 ways to speak about it and call it. And I think everyone has their own way of understanding that. But because our psyche, collective psyche, is so off, I think that externalizes into the climate crisis. But that's why I'm so against, like, Paul Hawken is releasing a beautiful book, I think it's in March or April, about like carbon not being the enemy, but carbon being this like magnificent dynamic force of life that's like this animate molecule that is like everything we love, It's not like we have to fight carbon, but we've like externalized the villain, and we externalize the villain in like the climate crisis and in the floods and the hurricanes. But they are expressions of a system acting out because there is repression and dysbiosis in the psychic matter that creates that system. And so in a way, I guess I would see some of the runaway like floods or hurricanes or, the atmospheric rivers that should be there, but then they dump way too much water on soils that haven't had the ability to hold water because they're so dry. So these periods of, drought and floods, it's kind of like the Earth's emotionality acting out because there's repression somewhere else, and things aren't being allowed to flow. And so it's like when someone's storing all this anger and they're fine. And then they're like in the coffee line and then they're like, scream at the bartender because it was like an oat latte, not like an almond latte. And you're like, come on, dude. Like, but the compassion for that. So I see these like, these massive shifts we're seeing as the unprocessed, or the version, like the visibility of these emotions that aren't being process that is obviously, as we are nature, expressed in nature. In terms of the cleansing, one could say that fires are cleansing, that floods are cleansing. However, currently they're not that cleansing. Like, think about the LA fires and the huge, and all of the fires happening right now, and the huge toxicity that that's dumping, because they're moving through these man-made structures and they're killing thousands of animals, millions of animals, and then you have all of the, the charred remains of those creatures. So I can't see the way, can see the earth trying to cleanse through those things, but I don't know if it's quote unquote working. But honestly, who am I to know about the earth's long-term functionings? And maybe this is exactly a version of cleansing, because it will force us to change.
Yeah. No, it's beautifully put, really beautifully put. And yeah, we're pretty dysregulated, aren't we, as an earth and bodies. And, I appreciate what you said around the words tightening and that contracting. And, when there isn't enough, and we're all scared that there isn't enough, what does the body do? It hardens and tightens and contracts. And just like we're seeing politically and in couples and in families, and it's this hoarding, this contraction of resources, and trying to deal with this myriad display of symptoms that's playing itself out in earth and in the body. And like you're saying with fires and a lot of this dysregulation that we're seeing now play out, it just looks very confusing and complex, and hard to understand. I was recently reminded about how, when accessing some of the deeper reservoirs of channel systems in a human body, when you're really accessing that deep trauma, just like that deep trauma you're speaking to with Earth's psyche and human psyche, oftentimes when stuff starts to come out, it's unconscious, because when it got packed in, it was unconscious. And if you imagine like a body all of a sudden, just like the earth, all of a sudden off-gassing and having all of these symptoms come seemingly out of nowhere, after the lifetime and lifetimes of burden and communication, it's going to look pretty hot and messy. And that's what we're seeing. And I appreciate, what you're speaking to, because it's really challenging for any person to know how to stay in relationship right now. It's a huge challenge.
Yeah, I'm with you. So 2 more things as we wrap. I'm gonna move us from this deeply emotional and sobering and important moment of the conversation. Are there any other wild speculations we could make about, like, what would the liver of the earth be? What would the kidneys be? What would the heart be? When we look at the body's organ systems, whether from the literature or just fun, speculative intuition, could we look at continents or types of ecosystems or types of processes as serving the roles of our organs? Lungs or trees? I'm going to just throw that one out there as I think about it. But just curious if you have any other fun thoughts to throw in for that. And I would so welcome if any listeners come up with fun ideas for that, because it's just, I'll say it in the introduction, but the beauty is in the conversation of even understanding that the earth is a body. And, there's Gaia theory, and there's all of these ways that we just, that is like actually true. But to go through the exercise of, okay, the body has its life world and all these organs, and like, what does that look like in nature? Just even that is like helping us become more intimate with nature, because sometimes it makes it more palpable when we connect it to something we know so well, like our own bodies. So I don't know, what would the brain be? Do you have any radical fun ideas for this?
Oh, I love that question. Yeah, and it all comes down to perspective, right? Like, I'd love to hear what everyone has to say about this. Intuitively, I think I mentioned before, I think about ice caps and glaciers, like essence. In Chinese medicine, they call the kidneys the wise sages, and just like glaciers, knowing when to release fresh water into the oceans and rivers and regulating temperature. There's something to that. I mentioned to you before, feeling into the Amazon rainforest as the hydro, like the hydro pump, the heart, that's regulating atmospheric movements in the rest of the world. And what else could we say? The circulatory system, the water system. Um, Also, the nervous system could be like the electromagnetic system of the earth. Could
That's
think
an
of it that
interesting
way when
one.
we were talking about
Yeah.
frequency and yeah, atmosphere, trees, lungs. We could equate. We
Hmm.
could look at all of these things. It's so much fun to explore.
It is a playful and fun way to do it. I could even imagine like creating curriculum for like kids in school where you can just like let them have fun with that. So, sort of closing question. Not everyone can have the time, the space, the privilege to find a practitioner, work with someone, work through whether it's their toxicity or lack of stock and flow. What resources would you point people towards if they can't work with someone directly or it's just not available to them in some way or form? What are some resources that everyone can access? What are some things that everyone can do just to give a little bit of agency and empowerment to those who are listening?
It's a wonderful question. Two things. One would be to find some way to work with the mind, whether that's a sitting practice, whether that's with a therapist, some way to work with the mind, because the mind is creating the display of the body moment to moment. It really, really comes back to the mind, just as we've been talking about with the planet. That's one thing. And the other is, start with food. Start with what you put in your mouth and how you put it in your mouth. If you're doing it in a way that's connected, if you know about a local farmers market or CSA or way that you can connect in horizontally to community and understanding what you're eating. Oh, what a wonderful place for every human to start. It's like that vertical with the mind and that horizontal integration with your community and with your food. Before any doctor, before any detox program, just that.
Yeah. And actually, I like what you said about like, well, we can also over complexify. Like when you go into a health food store, there's like 100 things, and there's all of these superfoods, and there's all these bars with all these adaptogens, and like part of me is a bit of a sucker for that because I'm fascinated and I love flavors and I love trying to go in, and but it can probably be information overload for the body if you're like suddenly doing like way too many things, and especially if you're just going to a supermarket and buy it. And I like what you're saying, which is more like relationship to the food, even slowing down when we eat it. I have a mindful eating practice meditation on the podcast. By the way, it's inspired by Plum Village, so I can link that in the notes. But yeah, like actually like 5 things eaten healthily really well will be much better than like putting maca and acai in your whatever else, in your like morning bowl. Is that right? Or am I being cheeky?
I'm so glad you're bringing this up. Oh my gosh. And also, yes, just yes, and personal experience as well. I think that I remember with my own body when I started doing a ton of superfood type stuff, I actually felt worse because my mind was getting too involved. When you go to a supermarket, I think the most powerful way to play is to follow the body and see what you're attracted to. A little green over here, and is it celery? Is it legumes over here? Or and really getting in touch through the body. What does the body want to consume? And this is so much more important than what an advertisement is telling you. And then how, like you're saying, it's like, oh my gosh, we eat our food so quickly. Are you chewing? Are you actually taking in the nutrients that you're spending all this money on?
Mm-hmm.
Make it really simple. Make it
Yeah.
soft and relaxed and enjoy and with so much gratitude, breaking down the food, starting with how we how we chew it in our mouths.
I really appreciate that. And I think the last thing I'll say is when it comes to like the emotional healing part, I've had so many people on the podcast speak to this now, and people I work with. And I think Robin Wall Kimmerer says it as well, which is like, don't wait to be healed before trying to heal or work with the earth. When we heal the earth, we heal ourselves. And there's something about like the agency that comes from just getting involved in something, whatever it is, you know, however local or quote unquote small, which is never small because everything ripples out. But I think like emotionally connecting to acts of restoration starts to give us like the excitement and the relationship that allows us to process those deeper emotions. And then you meet communities of people that are doing it too, so you can be safer to express emotions, and that starts to heal the like more latent stagnancy or dysbiosis or contraction of which we spoke. And so I think emotionally that's something that I would like humbly, you know, recommend to anyone I know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I love that.
Mackenzie, thank you so much for coming on. I've enjoyed this conversation so much, and how intimate it is to speak about health in our bodies. So, yeah, thank you for being a beacon of healing for so many people I know you work with. It's really we're all very lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you, Alexa, and you too. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. I really appreciated the conversation. Thanks so much.